You're right.
Hey guys. So in this webinar, we are basically going to go through a basic Hasura flow, and we are going to use a Node.js Express app and quickly deploy it, and also explore the other features that Hasura has along the way. Right? All right. So you don't really need to know Node.js a lot or be that experienced a developer to follow along. It will be quite straightforward and easy. And in case you guys have any doubts, just you can just ask in the comments, and I'll promptly reply. All right. So before we begin, so the first place to start whenever you have Hasura is to go to this place called the hub, which is at hasura.io/hub. Right, and so hasura.io/hub basically has a bunch of quick starts. These are basically projects that have other stacks and boilerplates put together, right? And
one second. This is screen share.
One second, guys. Looks like I kind of forgot to screen share. Where is the thing? Okay.
Go there. Click on screen share. Entire screen.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So this is hasura.io/hub. So basically, this is the place wherein a lot of you can get a lot of quick starts and basically boilerplate codes that you can just use to get started really quickly. So you don't really have to waste time setting things up or setting up your deployment procedure or anything of that sort, right? So for the purpose of this webinar, what I'm going to go through is the Node.js quick start. So. And I'm going to go with the Hasura/Node.js Express quick start. Everything maintained as Hasura is something that is maintained by Hasura, right? So let's go with this. And so the instruction to clone and deploy this is quite simple. You just have to click on this button and the instructions come up on the screen. So what you have to do, the very first thing that you need is the Hasura CLI tool. I already have that installed on my laptop. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this command on my terminal, right? Okay. So what this command does is basically clones the. Seems to be a problem.
No,
it's fine now. Okay, fine, cool. So what this command does is basically it clones the project into your local machine, and so in this case it creates a new directory called hello Node.js Express, and the next thing it does is basically create a cluster for us. So Hasura basically creates a free cluster for you, which you can use. So in this case, the name of the cluster is adjacent 66. It also adds the SSH key from your machine into the cluster so that you can easily deploy things, right? So let's take a look at this directory. So I'm going to open it up on Atom. Okay. All right. So this quick start, I'm just going to close all of this so that you guys are not distracted. All right. So the quick start basically comes with a bunch of files and directories and which you can control and which are tracked by a Git repository, right? So what concerns us at this point in time is the microservices directory. And if you check inside the microservices directory, you'll see that there's a directory called API. So in this case, our Node.js app is going to be inside this API directory, right? All of our code and everything is going to be inside this. So if you go inside the source directory, you'll see that we have all the required files, like a simple package or JSON with a few libraries pre-added. And if you go to server.js, you'll see that all these libraries are loaded. And what we're doing is we have basically set up a simple router for you so that you can easily get started, right? So I have set up a router called Hasura examples router, which handles the /route, right? So I'm just going to go in here and check. So I'm going to quickly. All right. So what concerns us at this point in time should only be this /endpoint. So what that does is returns a basic text which just says hello world from hello Node.js Express, right? Okay, so now let's go ahead and deploy this and see how that is done, right? So I'm just gonna. So every deployment that happens on Hasura is a simple git push command. So all you have to do is commit your changes and simply do a git push Hasura master and it gets deployed. Also, you can check the status of your cluster by just saying Hasura cluster status. And if you want to check the domain of your cluster, you can just ping it at, so in this case, it's the cluster name is adjacent 66. You can just do, right? So this is basically the IP at which your cluster is hosted and whatnot. Cool. So now let's go ahead and deploy our app. So I'm going to do a git add, a git commit. So let's call it, say, first commit, and I'm going to do a git push. That's master. All right. So while that happens, this will take like about 20-30 seconds. So while that happens, I'll just briefly explain what is happening, right? So as I said, what concerns us at this point in time is the microservices directory. So inside that, we have one microservice at this point in time, which is the API microservice, right? So how you would run this app locally in case you were developing this on your local computer would be that you would have a package.json file, and then basically you would just do an npm install on the package.json, and then finally do a node serve.js or whatnot, right? So what the Dockerfile does is exactly the same thing. So what we are doing is we're basically setting up a container or like a system which draws from an image called Alpine node, and which has like node pre-installed on it. The next thing it does is basically adds a directory called source, and then copies the package.json from our local source directory into this container source directory. The next thing we do is run the npm install on this package.json so that all of our dependencies are installed. And finally, we copy all of the files from the source directory into the container source directory. And to run this container, we basically execute the node server.js commands. This should make a lot of sense, because this is exactly what you will be doing, except for this part, because you will have all of these installed already. But this is exactly what you will be doing if you were running it locally, right? All right, so this is basically how the Dockerfile looks like. So if you come here, you will see that while you do a git push hasura master, these steps are being executed. So first we draw from this image. Next you basically set up a work directory called source. This is all happening inside the container, right, which is running our API microservice. Next thing is we're copying the package.json, we're installing it, and after all of this installing is done, we finally copy all of our source code, and then finally run the NodeJS server app, right? Cool. So so now the server app is deployed. The NodeJS Express app is deployed, right? So now to open it, as I said, right, the name of the NodeJS Express app that we're given is API. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do hasura microservice open API. And this will open up the app for us. So as you can see, at the /endpoint, it returns hello world from NodeJS Express, right? Let's also add another, let's quickly add another route. And I'm just going to copy this, or rather, you know what, I'm just going to change this. So I'm going to say hello YouTube, right? And I am going to, again, to deploy this, you simply have to add commit minor change. You should ideally have better commit messages, but anyways, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to write whatever comes to my mind. So and git push. All right, so again, our app is being deployed. All right, so that is done. So if you go back here and just refresh the page, as you can see, the change is being deployed, right? All right. So this is what Hasura does in the terms of helping you deploy, right? Hasura makes it very easy for you to deploy any app of your choice. So ideally, if you really think about it, if you are able to write this Docker file, you can ideally run anything that you want on Hasura, right? You can deploy anything that you want on Hasura. So but this is what the deployment bit of Hasura is. Apart from that, there are also other things that you usually have to repeat when you're building an app. Things like authentication, or like or performing CRUD operations. Like by that I mean like connecting to a database, storing some data, updating data, deleting data, and whatnot, right? These are a few of the things that are usually repeated also when you build an application. So what Hasura does is Hasura also provides you with backend components. So these are backend components that you can just easily use and use in your apps, so that you can build just your business logic and not really worry about all of these repetitive tasks, right? So for that, what you have to do is so every cluster that you get on Hasura comes also with a thing called an API console. So to open up the API console, simply go to your terminal inside your project directory and run Hasura API console. And something like this will open up. So the API Explorer is what opens up for you first. API Explorer will basically let you query and try out all these APIs. I will get to this in a bit. So you can also have a look at the other microservices that we have, like data. Data is basically you can create tables, you can add tables, you can query those tables and whatnot. Auth is authentication. So you would almost always require some sort of authentication in the terms of like sign up or login, maybe social login, mobile OTP, whatnot, right? Those are also things that are automatically done for you. Like these are pre-built components that you can just use. And these are also microservices, except these are the microservices that Hasura provides by default. The Node.js Express app is a microservice that we built. That is a custom microservice, right? All right. Apart from that, we also have the file store service, which will basically let you upload and download files. Then we have the notify service, with which you can send email, SMSs, and whatnot, right? Cool. So what I'm going to do is I am going to show you how to create a simple table on Hasura. So you can just go ahead, click on add table. Let's call it a test table, and it's going to have a column ID with integer auto increment, and let's have another column called value of type text, right? The primary key can be ID, and I have created it. I'm going to pause for a moment and just take a look at the comments in case everyone is able to follow, or if you guys have any doubts. Saurabh says my video and voice are not in sync. I think everything is fine, right? All right, cool. So all right, so you can also insert data into this. So I'm going to say test data 1, right? And once you insert data into your table, you can see that the table reflects this data. But this is the UI, right? So how do you use this in your application? So Hasura also provides this thing called data APIs. So these are very simple, intuitive JSON APIs that you can just make and not really worry about your ORM and all of those things, right? So we can just take a look at that. So what you need to do is go to the API Explorer, go to the data tab, and all right. Weber says I'm going a little fast. All right. Cool. I will try to talk a little slowly, I suppose. All right. So so to test out APIs, we just have to go to the API Explorer tab. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try getting some data from our test table that we just created, right? Go to this thing called the query builder. So so what the query builder does, it provides you with an interface to basically query data, right? So I'm gonna say that I want to do a query of type select. Select means read from table test, which is something that I just created, and I want both the columns that I just created, right? I'm going to go ahead and click on this. So it says role. It basically you cannot select from this table for role anonymous. Like it does not really, the API does not really know who you are, right? This is actually a security feature that Hasura provides by default, that nobody can randomly access your data. So you have to be an admin to access this data, right? So once I'm an admin, I can access this data. So similarly, you can just go ahead over here and add other permissions. So in this case, you can add like user permissions, anonymous permissions. So anonymous permissions means that anybody can access the data. So you would sometimes you might have like a news feed or something in your app, or some page that people can just access without logging in or signing up, right? So you would have anonymous permissions on those. All right. So one thing to notice here is that once I created this, 1 second, I'm just going to go to my other notice. Yeah. So one thing to notice here is that I created a new table called test, right? So if I go back to my project structure right now, and if I project directory, and if I see what has happened, you will see that there's a new file called migration. There's a new file inside this directory called migrations that has been added, right? This is so that this is basically keeping track of what changes that you've made to your database schema, right? So with this feature, what you can do is you can easily share your schema with other people. Or also, like if let's say you're building a production ready app, you will have two types of clusters. You will have a staging cluster, you will have a production cluster. So you will make all these changes in your staging cluster, you will try it out, you'll test it all of them out, and all of those changes will get stored into these migrations. And then finally, when you are ready to, when you've tested and when you're ready to deploy this into your production cluster, you will simply just use these migrations and push them into their production cluster. This is a feature that Hasura provides, right? So similarly, this quick start comes with a few migrations files by default, which also has some data in it. So those are like, there's a table called article, which has some random data. And there's also another table called author, right? Cool. So now what I want to do is I want to, so our Node.js app right now returns nothing, right? It just returns hello YouTube. So I want to create a new route called get articles, right? Which basically fetches the list of all these articles and gives it to us. For this, I'm going to go back and let's figure out how we can build this, like how this query would look like, right? So now this article table has anonymous permission. So because of which I do not really need the admin token. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say select, and I'm going to say table article, and the star denotes every column. So I want all of my columns. So I'm just going to go with star, and I'm going to hit on the send button, right? So this basically gives us a list of all the articles that we have stored, which I just showed you previously. Okay, John Murphy also says that I should slow down. Is the speed now fine? I mean, after Webof's comment, in case I'm going a little too fast, you guys can actually tell me in the comments, and I will actually slow down a bit more. Is it fine now, Weber and John? Cool. So, all right. So, cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to basically make this query, right? So what we need to do is we need to go back here and we need to add a new route called get articles. So this quick start also comes with some pre-written code to get the articles. I'm not really going to use this one. I'm just going to write one from scratch. So I'm going to say router.route. Let's call this get articles new, right? Save off. And we're just going to write a normal route. Say request, response, and okay. So we've created a route, right? Now, one nifty feature that Asura provides is that you don't really have to know how to write this in your language as well, right? You can just simply use the generate API code button. So just go ahead and click on that. The generate API code basically shows you the code, basically shows you how you can implement or make this network API in the language of your choosing. So we have a list of languages and libraries that we have. We keep adding more to it with time. So in this case, I'm going to go with NodeFetch. So NodeFetch basically uses a library called NodeFetch, and that's what will make the API request for us, right? So I'm going to copy this whole thing. I'm going to go into my route and I'm going to add this. Let's also indent this a little bit. I missed this one. Okay, fine, cool. All right, so this should go up here, and you can take this off or let that be there. Doesn't matter. Cool. So I've added this. Now the thing is that we also need to add this node fetch into our package.json, right? Because when the npm install runs, it needs to install this dependency as well. So the easiest way to do that, in my opinion, is just basically go into your source directory. So in this case, I will go to microservices, API, and source, right? And this is where our package.json is. So now over here, I'm going to say npm install node fetch -- save. What this does is this will basically add the node fetch package into our package.json, right? Here you go. So it's added. Cool. So we have that set up, right? The next thing is we also need to respond to this API. So when somebody makes a request to this route, we also need to respond. So what we're going to do over here is, in case it's a successful response, I'm just going to say rest.json of result. And if it's not, I'm just going to say rest.status, let's say 500, and message something went. You're not supposed to do this in production. You're supposed to figure out what went wrong and give the user more informative messages. But in this case, I'm just quickly showing you what you can do, right? Okay, so we have done this. So all we have to do now is push this again, right, to deploy this code. So I'm going to go back here. Let's go back to our root directory. Okay, awesome. We are going to add this commit a gazillion changes. Also, commit messages are supposed to be better, not like this. This is a joke. And push Hasura master. So now if you notice that the run npm install command is being run again, this is because we just changed the package.json file, right? What Docker does is it caches these layers. So if I was just making changes to my code, this would actually be taken from the cache. Okay, so that's been deployed. So I'm just going to go back here and we are going to say get articles new, right? And as you can see, we have articles being shown. All right, so we have now deployed a microservice. We have also written some routes. We have explored the API console. So let's say you want to have a look at what microservices that you have or what microservices Hasura provides. So for that, you can simply just say Hasura microservice list, right? And it will show you a list of microservices that Hasura has. So as you can see, API is a custom or a user microservices that we have written. And these are all the Hasura microservices. So when we made the data API, by data API, I mean when we made this API, we were using the data microservice, right? So every microservice basically has an internal and an external endpoint. So what we use is the external endpoint, right? So in this case, we use the data dot whatever project name dot hasura-app.io /v1/query. Right? This was the data API that we use, external data API. But the thing that we can do is that the microservices can also contact each other by contacting just their internal endpoint. So we can go ahead and just use the internal endpoint in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the data's internal endpoint, and from our microservice, I am going to replace this whole bit with the internal endpoint, right? Cool. So let's deploy this as well. You will have to do a lot of git pushes to deploy. I mean, easier workflow. And cool. Okay, so that is deployed, right? Now if we go back and check this again, all right, so it still works. Everything's looking good, right? Cool. So all right, so now we have done all these things, which is pretty cool. We also have, as I also said, we also have an auth service, right? Which will which gives you like authentication needs. So the apart from APIs that it provides, so you can, so if you go to the API console, you can see a bunch of APIs that you can use. So this is what you can use to sign up with username and password. Then you can sign up using social login, etc., etc. There are docs for all of these things, and you can just follow along and do it. But we have basically taken this a step forward and also built a UI around this, so that you don't really have to build UI as well, right? Because that is also something that is repeated almost always. So what I want to do right now is I want to say that this API or these list of articles, I don't want anyone to access it unless they are logged in. So basically, I don't want unauthenticated users to be able to access this API, right? Or to be able to access this data. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the conf directory. So before that, I'm just like, I mean, I'm just going to set some context here. The context here being that Hasura provides you with the power to maintain and basically change everything, customize everything about your cluster by just changing things or changing flags in these bunch of files, right? So in this case, what we want to do is we want to say that this route should not be accessed by an unauthorized user. So I'm going to go into conf. I'm going to find the routes.yaml file, and then I'm going to find my API subdomain. Right. So here is some information about my microservice, right? Now, what I'm going to do over here is to this, I am going to add this bit, right? So you can actually go through and read through all of this and know what exactly you can do. But for the sake of doing this really fast, I'm just going to copy this. So what this is doing is, one second. All right. So what this is doing is I'm going to tell them that restrict this API to roles user. So basically only authenticated users can use this. And in case they're not authenticated, redirect them to this URL, right? The cluster name is templated. So in this case, it'll be replaced by our cluster name and something /UI. So we'll see what that is once I push it, right? So I'm going to do git push again. It out for the whole API microservice. Go ahead and push this. Okay. All right. So now, if you go back here and refresh this page, since I'm not logged in, it redirects me to the some authentication UI that is pre-built for you. This authentication UI is also templatable, so you can actually just go and change a few things here, and this will also change. So there's a dark theme, there's a light theme, and whatnot. But anyways, I'm just going to go with this. I do not have an account, so I'm going to go click sign up, and I'm going to sign up with username because I've by default only enabled username login. I'm going to choose my username to be Jason. Password can be anything, okay? And I'm going to sign up. Now, as you can see, once I've signed up, it redirected me back to my page, right? So let's take a look at this in incognito mode. I'm gonna go to incognito window, open this up, and try it again. See, we have been basically redirected. If I go here now, I can log in because I've already signed up, and as you can see, the data is being shown, right? All right, awesome. So basically, these are the bunch of features that Hasura provides, backend features. Just to have a quick overview of what that is, you have data, you have authentication, both of which we have used. Apart from that, you also have file store. So you have just open APIs with permissions on it. So you can determine permissions saying that, hey, not everyone should be able to access it. Only logged in users should be able to access it. Or sometimes you're just going to be like, even random public users will be able to access it, whatnot, right? Based on your business logic. And you can just use the APIs provided over here. Technically, you don't even have to do anything. You just have to simply generate this code and copy paste it into wherever you want to use it. We can just, I can show you how you can just upload a file using this UI, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and upload some random file. So that file is now uploaded, and I can download it, right? Similarly, you can also access it using a get API post, and you can delete it also. We also have a notify service. A notify service is basically what you would use to send emails and SMSs and push notifications and whatnot, right, to your users. These are also like they're documented, and you can just follow it along and use it accordingly. All right. Another nifty thing that we can do is, so let's say I do not want this subdomain to be called API, right? Like who calls it API? I want to call it my API because that's how I am. I just want to call it my API. So I'm just going to go ahead and change. So I'm going to go to, so in case you guys do not know where it is, so you have to go to conf, and again you have to go to your routes.yaml file, and you can just go down, find your microservice, and simply change this. So you can change this to my API, and again you git push this. Okay, I'm going to do Hasura microservice open API. As you can see, the subdomain has changed. Subdomain has changed to my API, and it still shows whatever we want to see. So we can do get articles new. All right, cool. So this is also done. So with this, we basically come to the end of this webinar. In case you guys have any questions or suggestions as to what we could do better, or what you would like to see built next time, so we can also host webinars wherein we can go through a complete tutorial on how we can build a full-fledged app from scratch using Hasura. Anything of that sort, any suggestions and all those things, you can use the comment section right now to give me some feedback. Oh, now WebApp says that it's too slow. Okay. All right, so looks like nobody really has any. How do we host custom UI pages for auth? So in that case, if you want to host custom UI pages, you just have to build it yourself, and you can just whatever yeah, you'll just have like your own custom microservice and you just build it yourself. And just like how you would build like a UI or like a website or web page or whatever, you could just build it yourself. We would also try to make the auth UI kit as customizable as possible, but for the time being, that's what you will have to do. One on integrating Python, Flask, and React.js. Sure. So the next time we have, so next webinar can be about Python, Flask, or React.js. Alok asked, my question is, if I want to make the front end Angular 5, then where I have to create Angular project from CLI? Like, so you can go and find an Angular quick start. In case we do not have it, I can actually get that done. So I'm just gonna go and just search for Angular on this. Yeah, so you can actually follow along this hello Angular, and you can actually use this. But I think it's not on Angular 5. Maybe we can quickly build out one Angular 5, one on Angular 5, and you can probably use that. Email and chat feature. So not on this webinar. Maybe a chat feature would be a little like would take a little bit more time to show how you can implement something like a socket connection so that you can communicate between users. But sure, we can also have that in the pipeline. Which folder, like API folder inside microservice? Yeah, it will. So everything that you host on Hasura, like everything that you build on Hasura, every app that you deploy on Hasura is a custom microservice. So all of that will come inside the microservices directory. Oh, also React Native, yes. We can probably have like a webinar for mobile developers, so have both Android, iOS, and React Native. We will not really go towards the details of building UI, but we can surely cover how to build a backend for it, what to keep in mind, and how you can use Asura easily to build it. Paste the API code in our files. Do I need to learn something for that? So. You obviously need Navya. You obviously need some sort of an understanding of how the framework works or how the language works. But once you're comfortable with that, just have like a hello world or something deployed. Normally, just follow some docs and just the internet. You can find a lot of things. Just follow that along, and you will be able to figure out how things work. And once you have a basic understanding of how that is, you will be very easily be able to use the code generator. And I mean, it'll be very intuitive to you to figure out where to put the code. All right, is that okay? So I think with that we are done, right? Cool. All right, guys. See you next time, I guess.